They said Africa could not feed itself. They were wrong. While the world was watching gold and oil, something deeper was sprouting in silence and soil, not with bullets, not with banks, but with compost seeds and farmers' hands. In the heart of Burkina Faso, 20,000 farmers are being armed, not with weapons, but with wisdom. A revolution not televised, not reported, but rising beneath the dust. Who led this silent army? Who dared to reclaim the land itself? One man, Ibrahim Traoré. If gold built empires, soil will reclaim them. If you believe true freedom grows from the ground up, stay with this story. A quiet war is being won, and no one saw it coming. On April 12, 2025, Agence d'Information du Burkina AIB reported a groundbreaking shift in the nation's agricultural destiny. Under the direction of President Ibrahim Traoré, the government launched an unprecedented nationwide farmer training initiative, reaching over 20,000 smallholder farmers across 7 key rural regions, Plateau, Central, Centre-Sud, and Boucle du Mouhoun among them. In collaboration with the National Institute of Agricultural Research and engineers trained in Cuba and Brazil, the program aims to liberate Burkina Faso's food systems from foreign control. The curriculum includes drip irrigation techniques, biological composting, regenerative intercropping, and domestic supply chain management, all designed to end dependence on French and Dutch seed and fertilizer imports. In a fiery address at the program's inauguration, President Traoré declared, "We are not merely sowing crops. We are sowing freedom, dignity, and resistance into the hearts of those once abandoned." To international media, it was just another agricultural policy. To the people of Burkina Faso, it was a silent uprising against economic captivity. But what the world didn't see was the storm Traoré had been quietly preparing beneath the soil for months, if not years. The seeds of revolution are not always sown in parliaments. Sometimes they're planted in silence under moonlight, beside wilted fields and in whispered promises between a leader and his land. Long before the public launch, Ibrahim Traoré had seen what others ignored. Burkina Faso was not poor, it was plundered. The land was rich, but poisoned by imported chemicals. The farmers were skilled, but shackled to overpriced seeds patented by European giants. The food markets were bustling, but choked by foreign logistics chains that dictated what could grow and who could eat. So Traoré chose a different battlefield, the soil. He quietly formed a coalition of agronomists and soil ecologists from the global south, Cuba, Brazil, Zimbabwe, Vietnam nations, that knew the cost of independence and the path to food sovereignty. They met in secret in a decommissioned colonial estate in Zinire, turning it into a think tank for agro-resistance. There they mapped a 3-phase plan. 1. Detoxify the land through organic rehabilitation. 2. Disrupt the monopoly of imported fertilizers and GMO seeds. 3. Deploy a decentralized training army, engineers, cooperatives, elders, village by village, plot by plot. But Traoré knew ideas were not enough. To fight a colonial army of contracts, we must train a native army of cultivators, he said in a midnight meeting with his inner circle. They called it Opération Terres Libres, Operation Free Soil. And before a single announcement was made, 5,000 farmers were already in training. Their names never printed, their lessons never televised, because this was not for show. This was war. By the time the Ministry of Agriculture unveiled the national program, Traoré's strategy was already halfway executed. Every selected village had already received its first shipment of tools, hand-forged hoes, solar pumps, seed banks, filled not with hybrids, but ancestral varieties rescued from extinction and stored underground in the hills of Koudougou. Buried in the shipments were USB drives, coded modules, recorded in Morée, Fulfulde, and Dioula. These drives held tutorials on compost making, agroforestry, and biofertilizer fermentation, and education in liberation. Meanwhile, Traoré's intelligence wing was tracking something deeper: contracts between French seed companies and former ministers. Secret subsidies funneled through NGOs tied to agrochemical lobbies. A pattern of sabotage in prior food independence attempts, from crop blights mysteriously appearing after regional summits to sudden price hikes on imported inputs. One internal memo read, "The real war isn't in the north, it's in the south, in our roots." Traoré greenlit a covert operation, Nourrir sans maître, feeding without masters. Agents infiltrated urban food distribution hubs, collected supply chain data, and traced which foreign firms had quietly cornered domestic markets. The results were staggering. 6 European corporations controlled 72% of Burkina Faso's seed and fertilizer imports. Most operated through anonymous shell companies run from Luxembourg, funneled through Dakar, and shielded from accountability. That's when Traoré made his move. He issued Decree 044-BF banning foreign seed monopolies and empowering local cooperatives with sovereign supply licenses. It was not just policy, it was a strike. "We will no longer eat from your poisoned plate," he told a stunned council of former trade advisors. And in the villages, the whispers began. He is breaking the soil open and burying the past with it. While headlines remained fixated on geopolitical tensions and currency wars, something ancient was waking beneath Burkina Faso's dust, a memory, a rhythm, a reclaiming. Traoré's final masterstroke wasn't just in the fields, it was in the rituals of power. He summoned the custodians of the land, the griots, the village sages, the keepers of indigenous agricultural wisdom. In a ceremony under the baobab trees of Boromo, he stood before them not as a commander but as a son of the soil. He asked one question: what did your ancestors plant to keep the land alive after the droughts of empire? For 3 days, elders spoke, not about fertilizers or exports, but about spirit trees, rotational grazing, intergenerational knowledge, and the sacred pact between land and lineage. They revealed that the colonizers' agriculture was a weapon of control, not sustenance. Traoré wept. And then he signed Executive Order 28, Roots of Sovereignty, mandating that all agricultural schools teach both modern science and ancestral technique. Every new farmer would be trained not just to grow food, but to defend a civilization. Simultaneously, he directed the Burkina Faso State Broadcasting Network to begin airing programs featuring farmers, not ministers, where mothers spoke of compost, children explained seed saving, and elders blessed the rains. This was not just policy. This was cultural rearmament. By June 2025, 400 cooperatives had received funding. By July, Burkina Faso had refused 3 international aid packages tied to GMO dependencies. And by August, whispers had become a roar. He is not leading us back to the past. He is returning the land to the people so the future can finally grow. While the world debated power in boardrooms, Traoré was redistributing it row by row, root by root. The silence didn't last forever. By early September 2025, satellite reports from the European Union's Food Security Division raised concerns a disruption in seed demand flows across the Sahel. Behind the vague phrasing was panic Burkina Faso had ceased importing hybrid maize and Dutch fertilizers. Emails were sent, calls were made, and soon diplomats arrived. But Traoré refused to meet them. Instead, he summoned the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Security, and the Commander of the Gendarmerie into a closed-door session. The land is ours. Let them send their threats. We will send back compost. Then came the ultimatum delivered by an envoy from Brussels. If Burkina Faso doesn't comply with WTO agricultural market standards, economic sanctions will follow. 3 days later at dawn, military trucks rolled into Bobo-Dioulasso, Dédougou, and Zorgo. Warehouses operated by Monsiba Agro and Western Harvest, 2 foreign firms linked to colonial-era trade, were seized. Documents showed massive hoarding of seed stock and artificial scarcity pricing that impoverished rural buyers for decades. President Traoré appeared on national TV flanked by farmers, not soldiers. "We are not criminals. We are not rebels. We are not radicals. We are Africans, reclaiming what is ours. If you call compost an act of war, so be it." He declassified dossiers proving that several agro-dealers had collaborated with intelligence agencies to destabilize Burkina Faso's food supply in 2023. The people erupted. Villagers marched in unison holding signs, "No more seeds of dependence, our soil. Our power." Academics, poets, and even a former finance minister published open letters backing Traoré's actions, declaring this not a policy shift, but a revolution in the right to live with dignity. The old system cracked. The world watched. But this was only the beginning. The West responded with what it knew best: pressure. The IMF suspended development loans. The EU froze aid packages. And former allies in ECOWAS whispered of uncooperative conduct from Ouagadougou. But the move backfired, because Traoré had anticipated it all. Before sanctions could bite, he launched the Sovereign Seed Vault initiative, securing 22,000 hectares of protected seed stock from indigenous farmers across the Sahel. These were seeds untouched by modification, resilient, regenerative, and rooted in heritage. He also negotiated quiet partnerships with Uganda, Bolivia, and Vietnam, forming a new axis of agrarian independence. Their message to the world: we will not starve to obey. Meanwhile, Traoré's People's Agrarian Brigades, a grassroots alliance of trained farmers and youth volunteers, mobilized across the countryside. They taught, sowed, composted, and harvested, not just crops, but a movement. In a poetic act of defiance, thousands gathered at the International Agro Fair in Ouagadougou, where Burkina Faso's booth showcased not machinery, but a live classroom of children teaching sustainable planting to foreign observers. When one journalist asked if this was propaganda, a 12-year-old girl from Gorma replied, "If learning how to feed ourselves without begging is propaganda, then yes, we are guilty." The moment went viral. Burkinabe flags flew high in Bamako, Niamey, and even in Dakar. Farmers from across Africa began contacting Ouagadougou for training kits. The agricultural revolution had spilled beyond borders. At the UN, one delegate from a northern European nation muttered, "It's just compost," to which a Ghanaian counterpart replied, "No, it's a declaration of war on the system." And so the line was drawn, not with tanks, not with guns, but with roots in the ground and truth in the hands of the people. It wasn't enough to revolt. There had to be a reckoning. On November 5th, 2025, in a public hall once used for colonial court proceedings in Ouagadougou, the people gathered not to be judged, but to judge. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the center of a televised national forum titled "The People versus the System, a Hearing of Truth." This was not a courtroom of robes and gavels. It was a circle of elders, youth, and rural voices, flanked by scholars and legal advisors. The defendant, the legacy of foreign-controlled agriculture and its enablers. Documents were unveiled showing how phosphate fertilizer contracts had been manipulated by intermediaries from Europe, inflating prices by 240% while leaving local farmers in debt. One document revealed that a single Dutch firm made $28 million in profit during the worst drought of 2022. A former official, once silent, stepped forward in shame. "We were told it was standard procedure. We didn't know it was designed to trap our people." Farmers testified. One by one, their voices cracked but did not tremble. A woman from the Sahel, eyes glinting with both pain and defiance, held up a withered root. "This died. My son died, but the bank still asked for payment." A stunned silence fell over the hall. Traoré took the microphone. "This is not vengeance. This is liberation. If we don't name the system, it will rename itself and return." The audience erupted in thunderous applause. But this wasn't performance. It was truth, echoed back to power. Outside, tens of thousands watched from projectors in city squares. Across the continent, African media broadcast it as a milestone, a people putting the system that choked them on trial. The next revelation shattered even the toughest hearts. A confidential report smuggled from the archives of a foreign NGO was displayed on the screen. It detailed how Burkina Faso's soil had been used as a live testing ground for synthetic pesticides banned in Europe. They knew it caused liver failure. They tested it anyway. Gasps echoed. A mother in the crowd fainted. Nurses rushed in. The room did not erupt in anger, it froze in horror. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He raised a seed. This is the antidote. This is what they feared. A nation that can grow for itself, not beg for permission. From that moment forward, he announced the Sovereign Soil Protection Act would come into force. The act would ban importation of chemical fertilizers not certified by Burkina's National Agronomy Institute, nationalize degraded farmlands, and launch community-led recovery missions, allocate $45 million from state reserves to launch a sovereign soil health monitoring bureau. He paused. No more will death arrive in sacks labeled aid. International observers in the back scribbled furiously. Some smirked, but a few nodded. And in the most unexpected turn, a European scientist formerly contracted by the very NGO implicated stepped forward with trembling hands. "I was wrong. They told us no one would notice. But someone did. He's standing right there." He pointed at Traoré. The room exploded in chants. Traoré, Traoré, le peuple est là. This was no longer just a trial. It was a confession of a continent long violated and a ceremony of cleansing. The ashes of betrayal were being swept aside, not with rage, but with truth. As night fell and the lights dimmed across the People's Forum, Traoré stood alone beneath a beam of warm light. Before him an open ledger, not of laws, but of lives. He called forth a child barefoot, maybe 7 years old, holding a plant in one hand and a chalkboard in the other. "Tell them what this is," Traoré said gently. The boy whispered, "This is millet. This is my school. This is my future." Tears welled up, not just from the boy's eyes, but from farmer soldiers, even journalists. Traoré then read aloud a single line written by the child in crooked chalk letters. "Our land is not poor. It was poisoned." He raised the chalkboard high. If a child can see the truth, what excuse do we have to remain blind? He then turned to the international community watching live. "You said our people could not manage their land. You said our leaders could not govern with dignity. You said sovereignty was too expensive. Well, this is the bill we return to you, 60 years of exploitation paid in blood and hunger, and we reject it." The final motion of the forum passed with unanimous support: creation of the Pan-African Soil Justice Tribunal headquartered in Ouagadougou, inviting any African nation to put forward cases of ecological or agricultural sabotage linked to neocolonial practices. The next day, headlines across Africa read, "Burkina Faso declares soil sovereignty, and Africa listens." And in the comments under every broadcast, thousands echoed the call. If you believe truth must be spoken, write a message for Africa. Call to action. If you also believe that truth must be spoken, that the land must belong to those who till it, write one line for Africa in the comments. The world must hear what the soil remembers. Just when the nation began breathing through its bruises, a storm surged from the shadows, but not against Traoré. It came from within a powerful Western agribusiness conglomerate, formerly untouchable, whose name had appeared over and over in leaked documents linked to seed monopolies and soil degradation across West Africa. Their former chief science officer, Dr. Nadine Albrecht, once dubbed the Queen of GMO Breakthroughs, stepped forward in a press conference broadcast live from Geneva. She had seen Traoré's trial. She had heard the child's words. And she brought with her a classified soil analytics report dated 2020. Never meant to see light, clearly documenting an intent to exhaust Burkina Faso's land through rapid cycle hybrid crops requiring external chemical dependencies. Dr. Albrecht's voice trembled. "I helped design the trap, but he saw through it. I thought Africa would never fight back. I was wrong. The shock was not just her confession. It was what came next. I've resigned. I now offer all my research to the people of Burkina Faso. I ask forgiveness, not with words, but with work." She would fly to Ouagadougou under the protection of Pan-African soil defenders. Traoré personally authorized it. That very night, African social media erupted, a colonizer turned confessor, a soil scientist turned savior, a silent war now audible to the world. The balance had shifted, not with bullets, but with the moral weight of truth finally spoken by one who once engineered silence. 2 days after Dr. Bosch, Albrecht's revelation. Another surprise struck, this time not from a scientist, but from a state. The Republic of Cuba, long a friend to revolutionary causes, issued a formal communiqué to Burkina Faso. "We recognize and salute President Traoré's leadership in reclaiming agricultural sovereignty. Effective immediately, Cuba will dispatch 120 agroecology experts, irrigation engineers, and seed diversity specialists to support his national transformation." But what sent shockwaves across the globe wasn't Cuba's message. It was Brazil's sudden endorsement. The newly elected president of Brazil, pressured by rising demands from indigenous and Afro-Brazilian movements, declared, "Burkina Faso has reminded the world that the land must breathe free. Brazil will open its seed banks to African nations seeking true sovereignty." Within hours, African nations from Mali to Chad, Ghana to Niger sent emissaries to Ouagadougou to request access to training partnerships in soil restoration and shared strategies for agro-independence. A small country barely visible on the map to many had become the epicenter of agrarian revolution. At the National Assembly, one elder stood up and declared, "They thought gold would free us. They were wrong. It is the soil, it is the seed." Traore responded, "Gold will buy time, guns will protect space, but only food grown with dignity will give us the future." From the silence of forgotten farmers rose a thunder louder than any weapon. This was no longer Burkina Faso's war. It had become Africa's quiet revolution. As the world turned its gaze to West Africa, the unexpected reached even deeper. A trove of declassified French diplomatic cables, leaked by an anonymous whistleblower, surfaced on a pan-African media network based in Dakar. The documents revealed decades of strategic soil exhaustion policies coordinated under economic aid programs. Among the most damning excerpts, promote synthetic fertilizers and foreign dependency in rural Burkina to prevent full agricultural autonomy. True food sovereignty risks destabilizing France's commodity flow. And worse, ensure local agricultural experts remain untrained beyond baseline knowledge. Advanced agroecology must be contained within French-approved academies. The leak triggered protests across Francophone Africa. In Senegal, teachers marched with placards reading, "You stole our language. You won't steal our soil." In Ivory Coast, thousands demanded the dismantling of French-run agritech centers operating under opaque contracts. Burkina Faso's Minister of Information, with Traore at his side, addressed the nation. "They did not fear our weapons. They feared our seeds. They did not fear our armies. They feared our farmers, armed with knowledge, with dignity, and with the memory of ancestors who fed empires and were fed lies." Traore then signed a new declaration, the Charter of African Soil Sovereignty. The charter called for banning foreign patents on native seeds, creating community-controlled seed banks, training 1 million soil guardians by 2030. It was no longer about one training program. This was a full-scale declaration of independence rooted in earth, watered by struggle, and rising like the morning sun. The revolution would no longer be televised. It would be planted. The dust settled not with silence, but with the steady rhythm of hoes tilling rich living soil. Children once fed on imported grains now harvested millet from their own land. Women who once walked miles for water now managed solar-powered drip systems. Elders once forgotten taught the youth the ancestral rhythms of planting with the moon. In a sun-drenched field in Centre-Sud, President Ibrahim Traoré stood beneath an acacia tree, surrounded by farmers, no longer peasants, but protectors of a nation reborn. He spoke, voice unwavering. We asked for no permission. We begged for no favors. We stood, and the land, our land, stood with us. His eyes swept across the horizon where green returned to once barren plains. We have learned that dignity is not a crop to be bought. It is a seed carried in the soul of every child of Africa. The crowd erupted not in fanfare, but in a silent salute, hands to heart, soil on fingers. Burkina Faso had not only reclaimed its land, it had reawakened its soul. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touched your heart, share this story. Subscribe to follow the journey of a rising Africa, one that will never bow again. God bless Africa.